Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And you are very welcome to today's event, which is one of a series hosted by the Renewed Ambition team here in Belfast. This is where we connect the global investment community with industry, with decision makers, and all with the aim of attracting finance and creating the partnerships that we need to achieve inclusive growth for the people of Belfast. I'm delighted so many of you are with us this morning. You might see behind me, we are just about to have what is supposed to be quite a nice day in Belfast, so we're brightening up and hopefully more so as we go through the next hour. I'm Gráinne Long, I'm the Commissioner for Resilience for the City of Belfast, and I also co-chair the Belfast Climate Commission, which is a partnership across public organisations, private organisations and independent organisations, community bodies, all working together to drive our ambitions for on net zero here in Belfast. And we have a specific work stream on climate finance, which we will come back to time and again in this session. So I would say this is a particularly exciting session for me, given the work that I do in Belfast, because it focuses on the city's ambitions to arrive at net zero emissions, but importantly from an economic and an investment perspective. So we're going to look at what other cities have done to integrate their systems to get to net zero. We're going to consider how we mobilise the capital that we need to decarbonise. We're going to look at specifically the challenges and opportunities for real estate design and management, both in terms of homes and offices for today and into the future. And we'll also ask how we invest in innovation to drive our ambition. There's so much happening in Belfast on innovation, but specifically innovation to decarbonise the city. So quite a start to the day. I hope you have your coffee at the ready, because we have four really superb panellists, and I have to thank them for giving us their time. What is a very busy week. I know a number of our panellists are involved in Davos and in other summits that are happening globally, and also events and work here at home. So Alice Charles, who joins us from the World Economic Forum, and she leads the forum's cities and real estate work streams, including the Global Future Council on Cities and Urbanisation. So a real understanding of what's happening in cities globally, Alice, but also how we need to change. So delighted and really looking forward to hearing from you. From Nick Robbins, who's the Professor in Practice at the Grantham Research Institute in LSE and leading the Sustainable Finance Research team there. Formerly co-director at the UN Environment's inquiry into sustainable finance system. I've gotten to know Nick through the work that we're doing at the Place-Based Climate Action Network and the Belfast Climate Commission as we look to deploy capital into new opportunities here in Belfast and Northern Ireland more broadly. Dr. Ian Percy, four-time Olympian, three-time Olympic medalist and double Olympic champion, but after retirement, as if that wasn't enough, Ian moved to Artemis Racing as a technician, co-founded Artemis and a CEO of Artemis Technologies. And those of us living in Belfast, many of us understanding Ian's vision now for how we use technology to drive decarbonisation, and more Belfast is understood now as being at the cutting edge of that industry and using maritime technology to drive the city's ambition. So really looking forward to hearing from you, Ian. And last but certainly not least, Russell Smith, who leads KPMG's Sustainable Futures team. And Russell works with me in council and with a number of organisations, all driving their own agendas in terms of decarbonisation, but really has his finger on the pulse of how to solve the kind of problems that cities and organisations are facing, and also seeing the opportunities that are there. So Russell, thank you for your time, and really looking forward to hearing from you on how you're going to challenge us also in terms of our ambition. Before I hand over to our panel, this session is particularly timely. It's timely for Belfast because in December we launched the city's first climate plan. We also launched the Belfast Net Zero Carbon Roadmap. So we have a very strong view of how we want to decarbonise by 2050. Personally, I think we'll get there much sooner, much sooner, and we should do. But what we've done through our work with the Place-Based Climate Action Network is really identify now the roadmap to get us there. So where are the priorities? And for Belfast, they are buildings and transport. We know that requires a huge amount of capital and investment, but we also know that it requires decisions to integrate systems better in the city. And we also understand the economic upside to decarbonising our transport and decarbonising our buildings is around about 260 million annually to the city. So that's the economic prize and the benefit to the people of Belfast from that saving to invest in other things is massive. So the trick for us is how we get there and how we get there soon. And we know we have to do that in this 10 years. So where do we need to go with that? We're mapping the readiness to different forms of investment in our buildings and in our transport. We're doing that work right now. But the ultimate aim is to develop a Belfast zero carbon investment prospectus to attract investment in commercial and public buildings where we're most ready to act. And I think that's going to be the trick in how we do that. So so that's the ask and that's the task, so to speak. I'm going to start with you, Alice, if I can. Your Davos is happening this week. You're attending Davos virtually this year. So you're speaking with a number of cities and listening and advising cities that are on this journey. What lessons does Belfast need to learn, and where are the pioneers that we can really look to and start to partner with in terms of decarbonisation?
Thank you, Grania, and thank you for having me. I think, first of all, there's more than 100 cities around the world that are on this path to be net zero carbon by 2050. The most ambitious of those is Copenhagen, which hopes to achieve that goal by 2025. But in terms of the cities that are on that journey, I think the lessons that can be learned is, first and foremost, those that tend to be most successful are embracing an integrated approach. So in that context, they have a plan, for example, to create ultra efficient buildings, to electrify their mobility systems, to create smart energy infrastructure, etc. So, you know, I'm only mentioning those three because mobility and buildings and energy would tend to result in the greatest emissions in our cities. So if I think of, you know, some good examples in that regard, a city like Helsinki, which is on a path to be net zero carbon by 2035, it actually has a holistic action plan setting out each and every action that they need to take across the board as a city to achieve that goal and by when. And like Belfast, they're hoping to be net zero carbon before 2035. And one of the biggest things that they have is they have a huge reliance upon coal to heat their city. And they cannot find solutions, for example, within their city or within their country. So they launched something called the Helsinki Energy Challenge, which is a call upon the international business community, academia, civil society to come together as consortia to put forward solutions to solve their problem. And they, you know, they offered a €1 million prize fund with that. So, you know, they've already selected, they've had more than 200 submissions. They've selected the top 10 entries, and in March they will be selecting the winner of that competition. So I guess they have a holistic plan, but where they didn't have a solution, they didn't hesitate to go out there and seek solutions from others. I think the other thing is that, you know, you mentioned cities, but we have to recognize that cities don't control everything. So, you know, for example, if we think about Northern Ireland, there's Northern Ireland Electricity, there's, you know, there's the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, and there's Belfast City Council, and there's the executive. So I think that cities recognizing where they can lead and where they can influence by bringing stakeholders together is critically important. And that's something that I've seen in many cities, you know, for example, in the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil, they have managed to do a huge amount of work to digitalize their electricity grid infrastructure. But it was very much the city leading and influencing, even though it was the electricity operator that needed to decarbonize and digitalize their grid infrastructure. So recognizing the role of leading and the role of influencing a city is critically important. The other thing I just want to mention is finance. So, you know, there's a perception out there in many cities that finance is only available from government. That is not the case. You know, you can have a variety of financing solutions and indeed blended financing solutions. However, when I would speak to the Blackstones of this world, what they would say is, we have lots of money, but we don't have bankable projects. And what do they mean by that? They mean that there's, you know, projects don't exist with the risk profile that they want to invest in. And so basically, I guess cities that have been successful on their journey to decarbonisation recognize that they need to put the capacity into their system to actually create projects that have the profile and structure that are capable of attracting investment. And one very good example is a city that you wouldn't necessarily think of is Quito in Ecuador. You know, this was a city in Latin America, an impoverished city with huge amounts of risk in terms of natural disasters, etc. And that particular city decided they wanted to build a public transit system, which is going to cost $2 billion. But the city leader went about getting the capacity from all kinds of international organizations, from the World Bank to the French Development Agency, first of all, to create a project that was bankable, and then second of all, creating, in attracting the investors to actually develop the project. So I think when I think of cities that are successful in their journey, they're the sort of three things that they would have in common.
Thank you, Alice. And that moves us actually seamlessly over to Nick and some of the, excuse me, the challenges, Nick, and the opportunities that you're seeing. And you know Belfast well, and know the journey we're on. What are you learning from your relationships, I suppose, with investors that's telling you, excuse me, what Belfast could have to offer?
Well, Grania, thanks very much, and great to follow you, Alice, on that sort of financial theme. So first off, really congratulations to the Belfast team for releasing your net zero roadmap. If you haven't read it, really go out and read it. It's fantastic, lots of really good analysis. And from where I'm coming from, looking at the financing of net zero, and particularly the financing of net zero in the context of a green and just recovery, it has lots of information about the investments that's going to be needed for Belfast to achieve the goals in terms of driving down emissions, but also making the city much more efficient, more jobs, and much more inclusive. So I think the first thing is to recognize that the sort of net zero economy we're talking about is much more capital intensive. So much more upfront capital, much less energy use, resource use, and so on. So it's a very different type of economy. The work I did for the CCC in the UK level suggests that we need to increase our capital investment in net zero from 10 billion a year, about now, to about 50 billion this decade. So this is not a smooth shift. This is a rapid, large-scale ramp-up in investment, and the same sort of scale-up I would think is going to be happening in Belfast. So that's the first thing, the sort of the scale issue. So really recognize that this is the decade for mobilizing capital. The prize is huge. Again, that actually this will lead to better output, growth, and so on, as we actually stop importing fossil fuels and start investing in our people and communities. So that's great. The second is this is about every financial decision. Yeah, net zero is not for the green team. This is about every public finance decision, every banking decision, every credit union in Belfast. All decisions now need to have net zero in mind. And as I think you were saying, Alice, that integrated approach. So it's not just, again, net zero in isolation, but net zero, which is very much linked to delivering social impact. And that's what investors are interested in now. They want to look at climate in the environmental pillar, but also the social piece of things. So I think that seeing this as a systemic approach is going to be very important. And obviously now with COVID, how does Belfast sort of see itself in terms of delivering that green and just recovery? That's the sort of second piece. So this sort of systemic piece. And then there's the mobilization, the money. Where's the money going to come from this? One of the recommendations we made for the Committee on Climate Change in terms of finance is that every financial institution needs to have a net zero plan, and that this should be mandatory. This is no longer optional. This needs to be mandatory. So again, all financial institutions in Belfast and so on need to be thinking about this as a core area. Belfast is a financial centre itself. Yeah. And actually has a huge potential to serve customers, whether they're households, SMEs, rural sector, urban sector, and so on. But making sure that this is seen as a core to sort of financial system planning. Maybe just a few things on that. One is that we probably cities should not always look to attract capital from outside. Yeah. One piece of analysis we did as part of the PCAN network was, on average in the UK, there's about 4 billion of investable wealth per 100,000 people. Yeah. And particularly at the moment, there are actually large amounts of unused savings. probably 3 times as much savings as normal because people aren't spending as much. So what are the mechanisms actually that Belfast, financial institutions, the city and so on, can actually to tap some of those domestic savings within the city, within Northern Ireland, local authority bonds, other structures? It's not as if that money has always been brought in from outside. So I think that's the first thing. And then who are going to be the anchor institutions, within the city? The banks, the credit unions, pension funds like Neil Gosk and so on, who are going to be those who are really going to help make that financing thing work. And then finally, just one thing we can discuss later, as part of PCAN, we're going to be developing a place-based climate finance toolbox, really to identify those different tools that could be applied, whether that's in housing or transport, for different types of users and so on. But I think really is sort of start now, really get ready for that ramp up, and perhaps start thinking about developing a sort of net zero financing prospectus. What is the prospectus? What is Belfast's offer to its own citizens, but also to the world in terms of the investment opportunity that this presents?
That's brilliant, Nick. Thank you. And as you know, we're kind of well on our way to developing that prospectus. But I think what you've done is really remind us that it is about every decision, every financial decision taken across the city. And that's easy to say, but really challenging to achieve. But I think nevertheless, what that requires of us now, as I turn to Russell, is to kind of really rethink how we make decisions, actually. Russell, I'm going to ask you to talk to us a little bit about your sense is that the real estate sector is and its readiness for this kind of change, and more broadly then, whether you think the policy landscape exists here to drive the kind of changes that Alice and Nick have talked us through and what's happening in other cities.
Yeah, good morning, Gráinne, and delighted to be asked to speak today. Belfast spending over $500 million a year on energy. It's emitting 1.5 million tons of CO2 annually to drive this change, as Nick and with Alice have said, requires some fundamental shifts and some fundamental shift in thinking. One of the, looking at priorities of how we go about this, the big one for me is that it has to be done with a national strategy. We have to provide the framework for all investment, for both domestic, for both industry, to know exactly that there is a strategy and that their changes and the investment they're making is within the framework that has long-term buy-in. We have the net emission framework, which has been published by within Belfast, and that's brilliant, but that cannot sit alone outside of a national strategy. And I think at the moment one of the challenges that Northern Ireland has is that we do not have a national energy policy. And if we look just down the road into the Republic of Ireland, they're starting from a position that's not particularly different from where we are today, but they have adopted this in a much more ambitious and coordinated fashion. They've published what's called their Climate Action Plan. They've now put this into law. They've political consensus on this issue. They've published targets for the amount of home retrofitting, the amount of electric vehicles they want to deploy. And while these are not answers, and there's plenty of criticism I'm sure people can throw at it, it does provide a framework, and it is mobilizing investment in the Republic, where people are beginning to mobilize the skills needed to do the retrofit of buildings and of homes, and they know that it's on a long-term trajectory, and the investment is in line with policy. So that, in my mind, is our priority. Northern Ireland needs to build upon Belfast's lead and have a national strategy that brings together nationally. In terms of focusing on prioritization, there are some absolute obvious and easy wins here. The emission roadmap shows 39% of our emissions in Northern Ireland come from domestic housing, and that is one where it does not require technical innovation. These are technologies that can address the emissions from homes without new or innovative solutions. That can be rolled out and can make a massive dent, 39% of those emissions. There's also options to do that are cost neutral. The savings that are generated from those innovations can also then effectively offset the cost. So we can make massive dents without having to worry about raising new types of finance. The transport sector then is another one that's particularly called out, and Northern Ireland is heavily reliant on cars. It's heavily reliant on the fossil fuels. The transport sector, I think, is a great opportunity for Northern Ireland. We have some brilliant, innovative companies. Wrightbus, for example, is leading the way on the hydrogen bus, and is a great way if we can decarbonise our transportation while also supporting some brilliant, innovative companies in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland also has fabulous resources. We're already leading in terms of renewable electricity. With 48% of our electricity comes from renewables. We can continue to grow deployment of wind, of solar, potentially bringing offshore in, and that can produce the hydrogen that can drive maybe some of these innovations and help Northern Ireland become a leader in some of these new emerging technologies. The final point I would say is education. KPMG does an annual survey every year of global CEOs. 3 years ago, the climate change agenda barely registered on the top 10 issues for global CEOs. 2 years ago, it crept into the top 10. Last year, it is now the #1 issue for global CEOs. They say the #1 issue, the #1 concern, the #1 challenge for their future growth is the climate change agenda. So globally, this is being recognized. My slight concern is Northern Ireland isn't quite realizing or waking up to the issue that is ahead of us. This is an agenda that everyone's familiar with. It's been around for 30 years. What's changed, though, is that the speed of acceleration of this agenda, more has happened in the last 12 months than has happened in the 30 years before. More has happened in the last 3 months than the 12 months. So it's about this acceleration, and Northern Ireland businesses, Northern Ireland leaders need to fully embrace and understand this. And we have to start making our investment decisions today based on a new lens, a lens not of today, but what the future looks like. And the investment decisions have to be made in the context of net zero. So they're sort of my views on priorities. Great opportunity ahead of us. There's no reason why Northern Ireland can't become a leader in this, but it has to happen today.
Thanks, Russell. So, you've all three of you talked about the challenges and the opportunities in this decade and how quickly we can move and ought to move. And Ian, you're doing that now. You understand the opportunities that are here. You've chosen to locate in Belfast and invest here. So tell us a bit about the decisions that you took to get you there, but also as Russell has challenged us, it's about industry seeing the innovation that's possible, and that's clearly the space you're in. So why Belfast, and then what's ahead for Artemis, and why innovation is so critical to this?
Hi, Grania. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me this morning. So just really quickly, what is Artemis Technologies doing, to give us some context so not everyone will know. Artemis Technologies is bringing together technology from sport, really. America's Cup, which is a premier sailing competition, and Formula One, and combining the ultra high power density electric engines into hydrofoiling systems to literally fly boats. Boats up to 130 tons. We're not talking tankers. I think we need to get it in perspective. But it's relevant to this discussion because those are the kind of boats you see in San Francisco or Portland or New York, utilizing the waterways. But the crucial difference with this technology is where the waterways in San Fran are used for obvious reasons because of the geography. They're 7 times less efficient than someone sitting in their car today. We flip that on its head, and by hydrofoiling with the high power density engines that people have noted, these low carbon solutions are efficient. We're able to be the lowest cost transportation network. So it's the cheapest and quickest way to decarbonize a city. Now, obviously, only the appropriate geography. We wouldn't work very well in the middle of a desert. But for the appropriate city, with electric hydrofoiling solutions, it's the cheapest and quickest way to decarbonize cities. So that's the basis of what we're doing here in Belfast. And why Belfast? Well, the obvious thing is the amazing history and heritage of shipbuilding here in Belfast. Such a proud history. So many amazing boats have left here, some famously not making it to their final destination. But interestingly, it probably wasn't that. The shipbuilding cluster here has been is based a little bit on a heritage from maybe even over 50 years ago now, if we're honest. But what has grown up in its place here is an incredibly advanced aerospace sector. around Spirit Aerospace, or Shorts Brothers, as it famously was, and the cluster of technology companies that marry that. And ultimately, for those to picture what we have what we're making is exactly the same as you see when you look out the side of the window in your aeroplane, only it's underwater. And suspended above that is a ferry or an asset transfer vessel out to wind farms or alike. So it's really actually quite poignant for us to be partnering. But the real reason we came here, having traveled around, is about collaboration and consortium. And it's maybe not something that people necessarily associate with Belfast. Belfast has, is infamous in some ways for its division. And I found the complete opposite when I came here. I found so many groups of people from industry, academia, and I have to say, many of Belfast City Council too, and the surrounding councils, wanting to work together, wanting to find solutions. And I have been around the world a fair old bit. I've done racing competitions and lived in many cities around the world over the last 25 years. And I have to say it was the best I've found. The most can-do attitude, the most open door, inviting atmosphere. And that made a big difference. And particularly actually the council and Belfast cities, because what we're trying to do is around connected cities, so a lot of the things we're talking about today, bringing cities to net zero. We can't do the last mile always on a boat. We're a land-based animal. So we can't always do the last mile. We need to do it as part of a connected city network. So you can't do that if you haven't got engagement from the city council. So we have a consortium with the aerospace cluster, with the universities, which is another huge bonus here, is the strength of the education sector. And with Belfast City, to use Belfast as an example of using this transformative technology to decarbonize the city, a city that actually doesn't rank super well on its pollution index. So we have a real opportunity. We are water-based here, sometimes water-based from the sky too much as well, but we are water-based, and we have this opportunity to decarbonize using this transformative technology. And that'll do two things. It'll obviously help Belfast, but maybe more crucially, it'll work as a showcase and a blueprint for cities around the world. And I think that comes right back round to Alice and Nick, Russell's point about the finance side. I think that is something that, before I got into sport, I studied economics at university. That was my background. And it's very true that the challenge is not about a cost over 20 years. It's a challenge about upfront capital cost. And certainly with our system, we did a lot of work using our simulation tools, which are economic simulation tools married with physics-based simulation tools, to find areas. We've looked at wind ships, etc., to find areas that had reasonable return for private investment, returns under 3-4 years for projects that have a 20-30 year life. But I think it was Nick, or maybe Alice, was saying that it's the risk profile is the challenge. It's not the actual capital. The money is out there. So yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting part of the conversation here. But when you have a demonstrator, when you have Belfast, the city, taking it on to showcase to the world that it works, that we have 5,000 people a day jumping on these boats, zero emissions, transporting into the city, getting on scooters and electric bikes and walking to work for the final mile, it's a much, much easier step for public-private finance to fund their own cities around the world. So we're really grateful, and we're really excited about the next few years.
Ian, thank you so much. And Alice, hopefully you can see there that, I suppose, the scale of intent and the opportunity that's ahead of us. And as you said earlier, and I think we've all said, the relationship between all of this is critical. This has to become a really integrated approach in this decade. What's your advice, and knowing what you know about both the buildings and the transport in Belfast, where are some of the priorities for us in this decade, based on what your knowledge is and what's happening in other cities?
So first of all, I'm actually going to refer to some work that we've been doing recently in the World Economic Forum, and a report that we just actually published this month. It's called Net Zero Carbon Cities, an Integrated Approach. And I guess what we're putting forward in that report is we're suggesting that cities embrace a delivery mechanism, which we're calling systemic efficiency. And that is to create clean electrification, to create ultra efficient buildings and smart energy infrastructure, but also by embracing the circular economy approach so that we make better use of our water, waste and materials. And we argue that by doing so, it also has added benefits to society and the economy in terms of reduced emissions, improved resiliency, massive job creation, which is really important right now. It reduces, air quality, improves air quality and improves overall our health and well-being. So, that is very much what we're putting forward in terms of an integrated approach. But just to highlight a few things that Belfast needs to really think of in that context. I think one thing that's often not thought about and not talked about much is that if you are to be a city that's net zero carbon, you actually need to be a compact city. And this is something that Belfast needs to do. Belfast is actually a sprawling city. It's a low density city. It has huge amounts of land that are capable of being infilled and developed. And if I take two examples of cities, one being compact, one being not. So if I look at Stockholm versus Pittsburgh, right? Two cities relatively similar in size in terms of population, but Pittsburgh uses 5 times the amount of land and has 5 times greater emissions per head of population than the city of Stockholm. So, and equally, cities like Melbourne have really taken on this concept. For years, they've been working on their 20-minute neighborhood concept, which means that everything that you need to live and work is within 20 minutes of your home. And I know that at the moment, Paris is really getting a lot of recognition for the 15-minute city concept, but in reality, Melbourne started, right? And it's been trying to ensure that it has development happening around public transit, whether that's a BRT system or a light rail system, and that they're achieving consistent densities across the city. So I think in the context of Belfast, I have to highlight that making Belfast compact, having consistent densities, having infill development is critically important. Then just to go back to the point that Russell made around buildings, that's critically important. I think that there's different types of buildings and we need to recognize that. There's commercial real estate, there's civic buildings, which the city authority and government own, and then there's social and affordable housing, and then there's private housing. So there's different types of building. Within that, government can show leadership and they can start to retrofit their civic buildings and their government buildings. The reality is that business models can be utilized where there's an initial injection of capital, and from the operational savings that they make from injecting that capital into phase 1, they can inject capital into rolling out phase 2, etc. So you've got to show leadership there. I think most city leaders that I would deal with would say in relation to commercial real estate, it's a matter of government introducing standards. So, the Dutch are very good at this, and Amsterdam has really seen the results from both the national government and local government working together with real estate, with investors, with bankers, with civil society and academia. And what they did was they introduced a minimum standard that a building could not be rented by the 1st of January 2023 unless it had a minimum B or rating of a C. And by 2030, that goes higher. But it meant that the financing industry recognized that they had all these assets that they were lending finance for, and they would have no value unless they had a C rating by the 1st of January 2023. So guess what? Financial institutions started making money available for commercial real estate owners to retrofit their buildings and actually encourage them to do so. So, now they've actually achieved that result, and we're currently in 2021. So I think having the standards in place to drive commercial real estate retrofit is really, really important. In relation to social housing, again, it's something that is within the remit of government, and government can lead. And I think it's, going back to the exact same point, recognizing that there's savings can be generated in terms of the operation of those buildings. But also, we have to think about one of the things I'm always shocked, and when I was in university in Belfast, I was shocked by this as well, was recognizing how the health and well-being of people is so severely impacted in Belfast. And I know it often happens in a post-conflict city, but actually a lot of those social housing buildings are also quite unhealthy because they haven't been retrofitted. So you can deliver jobs by having a retrofit program. You can make buildings more healthy. You can take people out of energy poverty who definitely should not be in energy poverty. And you can reduce your operational cost, as, for example, the Northern Ireland Housing Executive could do by retrofitting buildings. So I think that's really important. Another thing is there are buildings that are individual homeowners that need to be incentivized to retrofit their homes. But there's also, for example, apartment blocks. And you need to, as a city authority, be able to influence people to help them come together to sign up to a retrofit program where they're in private apartments. So I think that's really important. In terms of transit,
I'm going to ask you to just wrap up, Alice, and then I want to move over to Nick.
Yeah, just in terms of transport, sorry, I'm going to mention energy very briefly before I go to transport. I think Copenhagen is a really good example in terms of how they've leveraged district heating to heat and cool their city over the last 100 years. And in that context, is there potential to do that in Belfast? Absolutely. When I was in Northern Ireland recently, back home, I was so shocked to see gas continuing to be rolled out, because we should be moving way beyond gas. In relation to Copenhagen, they've went through cycles of how their source of district heating, but more recently, it's waste to energy, leveraging offshore wind, and they're constantly thinking about how they can further decarbonize their heat. But about 98% of heating and cooling in Copenhagen is through a district heating system. And they've also been able to leverage excess heat, for example, from data centers more recently to put into that system. So I think that's important. In relation to transit in Belfast, it's got to be about getting people out of their cars, getting them on public transit. It's a relatively flat city. You can walk, you can cycle. So it's got to be about getting people on public transit.
Okay, Alice, thank you. And you've given a really comprehensive overview of, I suppose, what's happening and what's really the normality now in so many other cities, and will increasingly be so here. And I will also ask this of Russell too, but Nick, the LSE has time and again made the case for investment in retrofit at scale. And like you've said, it doesn't just require government investment, it requires investment of a whole range of different types. First of all, why do you think that hasn't happened yet? Is this the moment now, as we kind of plan the recovery beyond COVID, to really start to invest heavily now in our buildings, in our existing stock? I'm sure want to come back to new stock. And Russell, I'll ask you then afterwards what you think could be some of the levers we really could start applying to that. But over to you, Nick, in terms of, is this the moment, and how ready are we?
Yeah, I mean, I think the theme that's coming through is and I like the thought of systemic efficiency, Alice, but I think it's sort of system transformation coming from the sort of the financial system, that this is a financial system which is going to have to be transformed in the coming decade. In the report we did for the Climate Change Committee, we had two case studies, one of system success, offshore wind, and one of system failure, which is buildings. I mean, I think perhaps we're sometimes a little bit too polite, that actually policy decisions in particular in the UK have been very poor in terms of changing regulations and so on and so forth through the previous decade. I think we're now getting there. And I think the key at the sort of all UK level is for a national retrofit strategy. Clearly, there are some good things coming through in terms of the recovery spending, the Green Homes Grant and so on. But I think a lot of the people I talk to are saying what we don't want is a sugar rush stimulus. I mean, in a sense, that's what we had last time. We had a sort of little impulse of money into green homes, and then austerity killed it off. So I think it's really clear that actually with net zero, this long-term target, that actually this is a sustained national remorseless process. As Alice has said, just to comment on the Alice example of Amsterdam, what was really interesting was the central bank was behind that as well. They were coming on the other side and looking at the loan books of banks and saying, look, we see risk there. So I think, again, that sense of system transformation. I'm seeing in the chat, one of the things is that, again, at an all UK level, we don't often have the institutions to deliver this transformation. One of the things that's happening as a result of leaving the EU is we'll now have a national infrastructure bank on an all UK level. So I think that is going to be a real priority for Belfast. The statement and the announcement of that national infrastructure bank, very much around actually working with local communities and mayors, cities, so on, again, with a net zero mandate. What is the offer and the relationship and the relationship, strategic relationship that Belfast and Northern Ireland wants to have with that national infrastructure bank? Scotland already has its own national bank. We already have the British Business Bank focusing on SMEs. Again, how are they going to support the entrepreneurs of the island? So I think sort of thinking through these institutions that are going to be crucial, and as particularly for the building retrofit, that this is a long-term strategy. The Construction Leadership Council has done a very nice piece at an all UK level worth looking at. But again, every housing financing decision, how is that? When are we? In which year in Belfast are we going to get to a situation where every financing decision for buildings and housing and real estate takes net zero into account?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Nick, thank you. Yeah, it should be this year. You're right, and I mean, I suppose that the challenge, Russell, and the opportunity is, as you said earlier, set out in I mean, a number of national and regional policies, but namely the energy strategy, which is forthcoming. We've got a new programme for government, a forthcoming economic strategy. There's a lot of focus on a recovery strategy post-COVID. How central is net zero emissions to all of that conversation, and what are you understanding the level of ambition of regional government is, and what ought it to be? Yeah, so like the lack of a national strategy, as I said earlier, I think is a failing at the moment. This is an agenda policy direction that we have no option but to embrace. This has moved from a nice to have. This has to happen. So all we're doing is delaying the inevitable. So the policy, I think policy needs to pick up. We have a virtual Davos kicked off, yesterday. One of the big themes that's coming out consistently during that is this Greek concept of green recovery and a fueling a just recovery. We are being economically damaged. There's some sectors that are being decimated across Northern Ireland because of the COVID situation, and this policy and the level of investment that's needed, is just the perfect timing to fuel, part of that recovery, and the ability of government to accelerate that deployment of capital, is fundamental. The concept of retrofitting domestic buildings, of commercial buildings, again, is a no-brainer. It has to be done. It has to be done. It is just a question of when, not if we do it. So, why don't we bring that forward? Don't we prioritize that? The number of jobs, the number of construction, the number of innovations. It'll also address fuel poverty, which continues to be a big issue across Northern Ireland. We're still hugely dependent on oil in Northern Ireland. It means we can get such easy wins so easily, so quickly, through building and producing renewable electricity shouldn't be the priority. It's about reducing the amount of energy we use, and again, that feeds into that strategy. There's other great opportunities across Northern Ireland, though. Buildings, transport are one. One other area that we've been very fortunate to get involved in is a review of the aviation strategy in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has a great history of aviation, but it is evolving. It's under its own pressures and challenges, and we're working with stakeholders across that sector of how can Northern Ireland reposition its involvement in the aviation sector to buy into the new direction of travel and the innovations needed to decarbonise that sector. There's also some great examples, though, of already innovations we have across Northern Ireland. I'd like to call it Bombardier, so an aviation link there. Bombardier have the largest building in Northern Ireland, the C-Series factory, which produces wings for the aircraft. Over the last number of years, we've worked with them, and they have now implemented some brilliant technologies. So, an easy one, they've put the largest rooftop solar array on their building. They've also facilitated the building of an energy from waste plant directly beside them, and that provides 15 megawatts of electricity, fully decarbonised. It also provides thermal loads for them, and they've also displaced their natural gas usage by using biomethane that's produced across rural Northern Ireland. So again, they're brilliant examples, and that's a Northern Ireland example
of bringing together multiple technologies. There's no single solution for this decarbonisation, but bringing together those multiple technologies. And the final example I'll just bring is another company called Devonish in Northern Ireland, and Belfast success story. And Devonish, its origins in animal nutrition, but they've recognised the fundamental challenge that the agricultural sector has. Northern Ireland has a very big agricultural-based food and drinks industry is very important to us. But that's a sector that also needs to decarbonise. It's one of our largest carbon emitters. And for it to have a continued licence to operate, it's going to have to decouple the growth of that sector from its emissions. And so Devonish is looking at innovations of reducing methane from animals, about producing net zero farms. And again, we're world leaders in some of those innovations. And we should showcase those and build on those, and not only decarbonise Northern Ireland, but help Northern Ireland help decarbonise other jurisdictions, and find new opportunities for industrial growth in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Russell. And Ian, as Russell has set out, essentially in the next decade, we're going to do several things at once in Belfast, aren't we? We're going to decarbonise our homes at scale and our buildings. That will require obviously significant investment, both public and private. We're going to transition our transport, and our TransLink, our transport authority, will transition to net zero emissions, the entirety of its bus fleet in this decade, and is well on the way to doing that and has a really good plan for doing so. As Alice has said, we've a lot of work to do to improve the compactness and the density of the city, and integrate all of those systems that you've talked about, Ian, in terms of transit across the city. But one of the reasons you came to Belfast were the skills and the skill set of our population. So what do you need as a company, but also knowing the cluster of companies that you work with, to drive and ensure that we have the right skills in place? So what do you need from a skills point of view, but also from an investment point to drive that investment and innovation? What else do you need, and that you need to bring forward yourselves?
Thank you. And really interesting conversations this morning. So much echoes on what we need in terms of financing. I think I always see that there are projects to decarbonise, be it in homes or in the transport network, some that pay for themselves over a period of time without taking account of the social benefits, some that don't, and some that do it in a short period of time, and some that do it in a long. And I see that's where governments can come in, because they can shorten the times down to attractive periods for private investment, and at the same time they can include things like contracts for difference to take account of the social benefits. And I think that's the beauty is it's pretty much the same across the board: housing, transport. It's the same problematic that that Nick and Russ and Alice and others have been working on, which is nice to hear. In terms of the skills side, I think that's one of the huge benefits of Belfast, and particularly having two world-class universities is huge. And actually for us, particularly in engineering, universities that are engaged in a related sector. I think there is on the manufacturing side, I think there's an opportunity. I think because the net carbon economy is, with electrification, particularly new skills, with lightweighting, and it's not necessarily strong anywhere across the world. And I think there's an opportunity to a hub. We're as part of our consortium, we're funding a training course out of the Met College, and it's in lightweighting and carbon fiber manufacture and electrification. So that's where we see the opportunity for having new skills is. And so those training courses aren't just for young people, they're across the board to retrain and get people into working, not altruistically. We need those skills, and we're really looking forward to it. So I think there's an opportunity to, especially in, as I said, in a collaborative city where people talk like this and they get things sorted, to try and get the training schemes in line with this new economy, and that will create a real opportunity. I think the skills are, from a study point, we have to put our hands up to the universities already, but I think on the skills side, there's a real opportunity to pivot and create advantage here.
That's really good to hear, and it's really encouraging, Ian, as well, to see that partnership between industry and local educators, both the universities and further education, because that is absolutely critical. I've seen some data In fact, it was Nick's colleague Andy Goulson who's crunched this data for us on the jobs at risk in Belfast versus the jobs that could be generated. And actually the picture is really positive, you know, but we have to get it right, and we have to be clear. Clarity of intent and purpose is going to be really important, but also ensuring those partnerships with universities and further education colleagues. I'm very conscious of time. We've only got 10 minutes left and lots of questions coming through. So I want to try and pose to each of you 2 questions. I'm going to try and draw some things together. I mean, the first is the issue of incremental change versus that kind of single leap forward. And a question from Professor John Barry, you know, an overriding sense of decarbonisation and climate resilience as a normal policy issue, but can it be achieved by a normal policy reform? Do we need something different, a step change in a different way? So think about that in your answers, but also very conscious, we've got the biggest climate conference coming up this year on our doorstep in Glasgow, over the water. How do we and how should Belfast really see that as an opportunity to engage globally, but also to showcase what we're doing, but to pick the finest and the best that will be joining us, hopefully in person, but if not virtually later this year. So I'll maybe start with you, Alice, on that one.
And the last question, or both?
Both. Pick, yeah, you can choose both, but but certainly the last one, yeah.
Yeah, I think to John's point, I think that most cities that are successful in realizing their plan have an overarching ambition. But, you know, I mentioned the case of Helsinki earlier, who has detailed every action that they need to take to actually achieve that goal. They have somebody working on every single action. So they have a coordinated team. They actually have a net zero carbon cities directorate within the city authority who is responsible for driving the overall action plan. But there's various resources throughout that city that are responsible, and indeed utility operators and businesses, etc., that are responsible for different actions within that plan. And they take responsibility for leading on the overall plan and influencing those that also need to act to drive the transition. In relation to, we have COP26 in Glasgow. I guess I'm hopeful. However, I'm also skeptical in that we've had so many COPs, and there's, you know, we've hoped for so much change. And then unfortunately, when it came to the COP, we didn't actually get there. And I think particularly, you know, Copenhagen is one that I can think of where there was so much ambition and we didn't actually get there. So I'm hopeful that we don't end up in the same position. I think what Belfast can do, and I've really encouraged Belfast to do, is to work with other cities. So, you know, be part of city networks, critical city networks. I know you're already involved in the Global Resilient Cities Network, but try and step up and be involved in C40, which is focused on climate. So start to come together with other cities around the world who can tell you how they're solving their problems, and you can learn from what they're doing. And I think COP26 is an opportunity to try and strive towards that. But the other part is to get the message out there about what you're actually doing. And that's, of course, in the international stage, but also within Belfast itself, so that you start to get commitments from business within Belfast as you move towards COP26, and hopefully that they will also join you on this journey to be net zero carbon.
Alice, thank you. Russell, to you, that kind of incremental steps or that great leap, what you think we're more likely and able to do?
Yeah, like, you know, this is not normal policy shifting. You know, this is probably the single most fundamental, you know, shift globally we'll have seen. So, you know, normal incremental policy, of course, will not get us there. That said, we need to bring people on the journey and bring them with us. You know, I'll give an example though. Like, you know, business, I think, needs to embrace this and needs to understand it. We spend a lot of our time within KPMG helping corporates understand this journey, helping them go on this journey. You know, a lot of companies are seeing it. There's still a lot that haven't realized or embraced it, but that is going to change very soon. So we had one company in the retail sector, had never thought about sustainability, never thought about net zero, just hadn't even come on their radar. Out of the blue, they got a phone call from one of their customers who accounted for 40% of their business. And that customer said, we're looking to embrace sustainability and a net zero trajectory. All our suppliers have to be on that same journey. If you're not, we're going to be cutting our business. So that's an issue that went from not even on the radar to being the single biggest issue for that company. It became an existential threat to the existence of that business, and we're now working with them to help them go on that journey. And we're going to see that, even if people don't, buy into the, within a couple of years, they'll have no choice. Their suppliers, their customers, finance, the entire finance world that Nick's talked about, the EU strategy of embedding net zero is to use finance. It's to starve companies that are not going on a sustainable journey of capital and make more capital available to those that are on that journey. So, I think the big one for me is for businesses, for Northern Ireland industry to wake up and recognize that this is an unstoppable trend. It's one that they have to embrace. And the thing is, while we talk about existential threat, that's, if you look at it in a negative lens, the other way to look at this is opportunity. Yeah. This much upheaval, this much change, this much moving and shifting consumer demand means that there's opportunities for companies that can align with that demand, and there's going to be brilliant success stories, and we just have to make sure that Northern Ireland companies are part of those success stories.
It's a really important point, Russell, and actually, Invest in I is doing a great deal right now to support companies and support businesses that maybe on the start of their journey and rather than midway through. So there's a lot of support there as well for companies. Ian, to you must be, you're obviously immersed in an industry that is driving forward and innovating, but your advice to other organizations or companies that are beginning to think on this journey.
Yeah, I think Russell's right. There's real opportunity. I think something that, by the nature of our background in a sport where they change the rules every few years, means that we've embraced a concept that we call digital twin. And by that, we mean simulating the complete environment before you start cutting metal or making molds or designing engines. And by that, I mean the finance inputs, the obviously the consumer demand inputs, as well as obviously all the physics and engineering that goes with it. So I think one of the challenges for governments is picking those winners that Russell refers to, is that knowing, because there is so many new technologies coming on, there's so many opportunities, and there's no particular systematic way yet, but I do think digital twin provides that. And so I think there's a real opportunity through that to start speaking a common language. I see it as a translation. Everything has to be translated into a language that the digital twin can output a result in terms of CO2 savings, profitability, consumer benefits. These things need to have metrics. And certainly my background in technical sport was all about achieving those metrics for complex problems. So I see that as an opportunity for new companies. So my advice would be, work out the journey and where you want to be with as high a fidelity level as possible before you start the journey.
Great advice, Ian, thank you. And Nick, last word to you. I mean, is COP the moment? Do you have the confidence now that it will be the conference that really changes mindsets in terms of what we finance and how we finance, and to your very early point, change how we make decisions fundamentally?
Yeah, no, exactly, and I think in a sense we're not in normal times. We have this terrible health and economic emergency at the moment, and that means, I think, that the response to climate change is no longer going to be normal. It has to be transformational. I think what is very interesting is how the hosts of COP use COP to drive things forward domestically. I saw that in France, certainly on the finance agenda, that actually having COP in Paris really moved the finance sector further than they would have otherwise done. And that means actually the Paris financial community is one of the real leadership centers, I think, in the world. And that's what we need to do here in the UK, really think about how is this going to be a catalyst for moving things forward. So we need a net zero strategy in the UK that needs to be, with all the things that Ian has set out, really, really crunchy. We're going to have a new national infrastructure bank. There's going to be a green sovereign bond, first of many. And for Belfast, we've got the net zero carbon roadmap, the city climate plan and so on. Where's the investment plan going to be? Where is every CEO of every financial institution in Belfast going to sign up to an investment plan, taking responsibility for his or her institution and actually delivering on that in the next 5, 10 years? That's what needs to happen this year. It's entirely possible, as we heard from Russell, Most of this is not new technology, particularly in the building sector, but actually now is about sort of translating that into really sort of time and delivery, and taking, I think, personal responsibility in the financial and business community and civic.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Nick. And to you all, you've been a fantastic panel. It's so easy to chair, so I really appreciate it. You may be thrilled or not so thrilled to see that in the chat, people are saying we should do this every 3 months and have the four of you back. So, so that's a victim of your own success. That's what you get. I have to say thank you to the Belfast Renewable Ambition team who've really helped us with this event, to thank the panelists as well for their input, and those of you who've attended and sent questions through. It's been really helpful also. This is my last week as Climate Commissioner, so I move into a housing role, so many of the challenges that you've all set me today is ahead of me in that role. But as I say, thank you to the team who have worked with me in council, and our partners, and all of you, many of you taking part today, for all of your support. I think the climate plan that we have now positions us really well towards that investment, Nick, that you have said is ahead of us, and towards the opportunities for Belfast. So we leave it there. Whether or not we're back in this guise in 3 months remains to be seen, but I've no doubt we will have many more conversations like this in the months and years to come. So thank you to you all, and have a good day.
Thank you, Grania, and good luck in the new job.
Thank you, Alice. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.